Welcome everyone to the workshop on the Graduate Research Fellowship Program applications from the NSF. And this is our third time we're doing this workshop, in which essentially we try to provide some information as well as personal overview from students who are at our university that have been successful at receiving those fellowships. And we have, well, supposed to have 4 presenters, but right now we have 3. We have Jordan Bush from EEB, Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Department. We have Jade Ofrecht from Bredesen Center, Energy Sciences. We have Sarah Cooper from the GST, Genome Science and Technology. Udo Onwubiko Maycom, I don't know, she was supposed to be here. And we have also Lou Gross, who's in the back, who's at Nimbus EEB / also math, who has been a reviewer for this particular program at the NSF, so he may have some tips for future applicants. So the way we're going to do it today is I'm going to give a very, very basic overview of requirements for the program, so you kind of maybe a little bit familiar, and then I give we'll turn to our applicants, and they will give you a little bit of a personal overview, perhaps also with some extra information about application, what they think you need to do to really get that award. And then every presenter, after every presenter, there will be a possibility to ask questions. We have a little bit of maybe online questions too, maybe on Twitter. And then at the end, when every presentation is done, we'll have all our presenters to sit here, and then you can additionally ask additional questions, etc. Right? Okay. Without further ado, so basic details of the application. So the application is kind of small, but it doesn't mean it's easy. So in total, there is kind of 4 components of the application. One is the personal statement about who you are, where you may be coming from, and where you want to go, and why do you think this particular fellowship will be useful or will help you to get where you need to get, right? So it's 3 pages, and NSF provides you for a little bit of kind of perhaps guiding questions of what you can write, you know. So 3 pages, not very long, but that's where you have to really be very, very convincing and kind of stood out in the crowd of multiple applicants. Then you have actual your research statement, research plan, which is again 2 pages only, so 2 sides. Where you are essentially propose what you're going to do, and how you're going to kind of approach it, what's the problem you identified and how you're going to solve it. You have to arrange for reference letters. 3 is a minimum, but you can submit more generally. There's up to, I think, 5 slots available, so you can have 5 people submitting, but 3 is required. And then you have to have your academic transcripts, right? Here's also a link, and I'll make this particular presentation, and I think other presentations we'll make available for participants at the end. So if you want to find it specifically, the solicitation number for this application is 18573. This is a link, but if you just type in 18-573 NSF, you're going to find the actual solicitation, where all the rules are described. And the only thing I put here was for the life sciences, the GI sciences, the deadline is October 22nd. For other areas like physics, it's a little later, I think, but they're all at the end of October, so kind of mid to end October, 25th, I think. You can look up, so in this solicitation, the dates are listed. A little bit of details, what I found on the NSF website. So
Just one note about deadline is it's due at 5 p.m. local. So if you turn in at 5:01, too bad.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, cool, yes. Yep, all right. The number of awards is 1,500, which sounds like a lot, but actually it's less than last year. So last year the statement was 2,000. They said 2,000. This time it's 1,500. So unfortunately, perhaps more competition. So for applicants, this is the total amount of funding. But effectively, what you get is you get 3-year support, the stipend of $34,000, and then you have allowance of $12,000, which is pretty nice, I think, for graduate students. Definitely more than you get through like TH support for many departments. Eligibility, the good thing is that undergraduate students can apply. So if you're a senior, whether you're going to stay at the University of Tennessee or not for graduate program, doesn't really matter for the application. So seniors can apply, and graduate students actually now they're from the last year as well. Second-year graduate students also can apply. So you don't have to be first-year graduate student. You can be a second year, but you can only apply once. So if you feel like you are not very strong maybe this year, if you're just starting graduate school and you feel like you want to get a little bit more muscle, maybe you have a paper or you're not very certain yet, so maybe because you only can submit it once, so maybe next year could be a better opportunity. Or if you feel like you're good to go, then you can apply this time. So not eligible, unfortunately, permanent residents, you have to be at least permanent resident, and you have to have United States citizenship. So for some of the foreign students, unfortunately, they cannot apply for this particular fellowship. Submission, you have to submit it yourself, essentially, in the website. It's called Fastline. And it's in the solicitation. It says where exactly you're submitting. You have to have an account. Effectively, UT doesn't know if you apply or not. So if you are a graduate student here, you just submit yourself, and if you so university doesn't know. So we did it last year, and I actually need to check if anybody emailed the graduate school. But it would be great that if you apply, if you're graduate students at UT and you apply, please give a note to graduate school that you did. So grad school dean at utk.edu, so they kind of know that you applied. I mean, they will know that you received it, but it would be good to know how many students are applying. So please do that if you can. There is another, call it webinar, that I learned about just recently, and it's called Writing an Effective NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program Proposal. It's going to be next week, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Daytime Line, and you can register for that event. And then so it's somehow through Blackboard. I don't know exactly, do you have to be with that program, etc. But there's some details, so you can sign in, and perhaps you're going to get an email that allows you to log into a website, and so it's all online. Might be useful, again, if you're serious about application, applying maybe this year. That could be an extra opportunity to learn. Okay, and so you filled in one of the surveys for people who were planning to come here. Udo? Oh, hello. So we have our fourth panelist, Udo. So for those of you who are maybe in here or online, if you could kind of, not right now, but maybe at the end of the workshop, go to https tinyurl.com, and that's UTKGRFP18, and then fill that in at the end so we know the total number of people really visiting us, and maybe if there's somebody online, kind of giving us a little bit maybe feedback. It's really like 5 questions, so it will not take more than a minute probably, or 2 for you to fill in. And that's where I am, and it's 12 o'clock exactly. So I think we start with Jordan Bush from EAB to give her, no questions for me. So everybody, 2 applicants, because they know the stuff the best. So Jordan, yeah, I'll find your presentation.
Hi guys, can y'all hear me? Okay. So my name is Jordan Bush. I am a 5th-year graduate student in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology department. I got the GRFP in 2015 when I was a first-year graduate student. I found that when I was writing the GRFP that I kind of had an idea of what a good research proposal looked like. You know, it's got a pretty set formula where you start with the intro and you have the methods and you have the the expected results. Like, it was very formulaic. But I really struggled with the personal statement because it just seemed like it was just this kind of vague, like, what does that look like? What should you put in there? So I'm going to spend most of my time talking about personal statement stuff. So in the entire application, they have 2 major criteria that you're evaluated on. The first is intellectual merit, and the second is broader impacts. So in the personal statement, the intellectual merit is why you yourself are a stud muffin, like why you are going to be a good scientist, why you have a lot of experience that's going to make you be very successful, why you're going to take what you do in graduate school and go on and do good things in the world. I'm sorry, broader impacts is why you're going to take what you do and how you're going to make the world a better place. So the structure that I followed that worked for me was to divide it into thirds. So the first third is who you are, kind of what you've done, how you view yourself as a scientist. The second third is about what you've done as so what you've done specifically as a scientist, so what you did in undergrad, what you've done so far in your graduate career, any and all research that you've done, kind of that kind of specifics. And the last third is about what you want to do in graduate school. So who you want to work with, what school you want to go to, what kind of project you want to do, what kind of support you're going to have, like all that kind of stuff. So the thing to remember about this is that they have your CV, so they actually know everything that you're, like, there are literally like sections about things you didn't even think that they would care about. They have a bunch of information on you. So the personal statement is really about picking and choosing individual things that you've done and like highlighting them. So it's saying what specifically you want them to focus on, what you think really tells your story. So yeah, that can be like if you did a thesis, if you've gone to conferences, if you have publications you're really proud of, like just kind of things that you yourself are really specifically proud of and that you think kind of show how you're going to mature as a scientist. So broader impacts, I think, is a tricky thing because there's 2 different ways to think about it. So the first one is how your research changes society. I think this is where people kind of tend to focus. But this is, I don't think, necessarily a good place to focus unless your research is specifically on cancer, on like crops, on something very, very specific that has really clear applications. Don't focus on this. You know, if you work on cells in general, don't say like maybe this could be applied to cancer. Like they know that they see through this. These guys are scientists. So unless you have really specific ways in which your research changes society, I would focus on the second one, which is how you as a scientist are going to like fulfill the broader impacts goals of NSF. And so there's actually a lot of different ways that you can do this as a graduate student. NSF is really pushing diversity right now, so if you come from an underrepresented group, or if you have worked with underrepresented groups, or if you care about working with them, that's something you can really talk about. They really care about science communication. That's something that I myself am really interested in. That's actually something that I kind of want to do as a career. And so that's something that I had a whole section of my GRFP about why communicating science is important and that kind of stuff, and why I think that it's something that I'm good at and want to do as a career. Mentorship is really big for them, like how if you want to mentor undergrads, or if you were mentored and kind of want to push that forward. Breaking down science stereotypes. Again, if you're an underrepresented group, or if you just kind of don't look like the regular Einstein-type scientist, that's something to talk about. And then the other thing is just kind of like outreach and community involvement. These are things that you want to be specific about. You don't just want to say, like, I'm going to do outreach. You want to kind of, if you can, say specific types of outreach. I'm going to work in such and such school. I'm going to volunteer for the Tennessee Science Bowl or stuff like that that's fairly specific. But you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So you don't have to feel like you have to like commit to creating entire new outreach programs. There's a lot of programs on UT's campus that if it's something that you want to get involved in or that you think you might get involved in, that you can mention. So yeah, judging science competitions, Science Olympiad is a big thing that you can volunteer at, Science Bowl, or high school science competitions that love graduate student volunteers. There's the Ask a Scientist group on campus that is a big outreach group if you want to get involved with them. So there's a lot of opportunities already on UT's campus that you can specifically mention if you want to talk about that. Yes. So then I just got a kind of a page of just like miscellaneous kind of specific advice, but things that I thought was helpful. For your personal statement, they really liked that I mentioned specific institutional support. So I talked about why my advisor, like what he did and why that was going to be helpful. I talked about Nimbus. I do math as well. I have a math component of my research, so I talked about that. There's a lot, if you're at UT, there's a lot of stuff that people don't necessarily think about. Like we have, for EB folks, we have field stations and a lot of collections, you know, like the herbarium and stuff like that. For other folks, there's the computer science thing, the supercomputer, stuff like that. There's Nimbus. So there's a lot of resources at UT that are worth mentioning if there's stuff that benefit you. For the research proposal, when you're writing that, one of the big things actually throughout this whole thing is that, remember, the people that are going to be reading your applications have already read 30 applications. You're just going to be one of a lot of them, so their eyes are going to be tired, they're going to be tired. So you want to really highlight anything that you want them to read. So use bold to highlight your major goals of your study and your research project, and your personal statement. If there's any specific sentences or any specific things that you really want them to focus on, highlight those, use that or bold those to make them stand out. One thing with the research proposal that I was actually told by somebody who worked at NSF is using figures if you can. So if you can, like, if you have like a method that's complex or that takes up a lot of space, if you could condense that into a figure that would make it so they could just look at that and know what you're talking about rather than have to read through the whole section, that's a good thing to do. I actually included a figure in mine. I don't know how helpful it was, but it was in there. And then finally for citations, there's a lot. It's kind of ambiguous in terms of how many citations you can have. I've seen successful ones that had 2 citations. I had like 20, so that was probably pretty overkill. But you do want to have them in there at some point. If you want to have a bunch like I did, I used the Science and Nature citation format, which was as small as possible. So all it was just the last name of the first author, initials of the first author, year, the shortened version of the journal, issue number, and volume. So short as possible. You can cram a whole bunch of references in a very small space if you need that. Other things that I just thought of when Vitaly was talking, when you're actually submitting the application, one thing to keep in mind is you're going to be submitting it on Fastlane, which is an online program. They do get backed up sometimes, so do not try and submit this at 4:50 the day that it's due. I would recommend submitting it at least the night before, just in case it like gets overloaded and goes down or something like that. If you submit it late, you will not get consideration. So I would submit it at least a day early if you can, or at least a couple hours early. Other thing, just to kind of clarify with the letters of recommendation, like Vitaly said, there are 5 slots, but they're only going to read 3 of the letters. The idea for having the 5 slots is that in case one of your people doesn't submit it for whatever reason, that you have a backup. Because if your application is incomplete, they will not even look at it. So the idea there is that you can submit up to 5 letters of recommendation, and you actually rank them. So you say, this is my number 1, number 2, number 3, and all the way down. And they'll start with the first one and then work their way down. So yeah, so that's the point of that, is to have some extras in case something happens. Your person in the field runs out of internet, which happened to me, like, just stuff like that. So I think that's what I have. Does anybody have any questions?
No question, that's okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thanks.
All right. Jaden. All right. That was pretty cool. Yeah. So this is if you want to show and then the slide.
So I think before I start, I just want to say, I know that all of you here probably are thinking at least about applying, but I know it's such an intimidating process and it's so competitive that you're probably thinking like, there's no way I'm gonna get this. I just want to say I came out of undergrad with a 3.0 GPA and I did not think I had a chance. And I just decided to try and I got it. So I just embrace, your science, be confident and just try because you never know, you could get it. So a little bit about me and my research. This is the research that I applied when I was applying for the GRFP. I do microbiology research at Oak Ridge National Lab through the Bredesen Center. And what I do is design custom sort of platforms that I can culture bacteria in. And so I've designed one platform that I can kind of recreate the structure of soil and see how that affects different bacteria phenotypes. And I've also created another platform where I can culture bacteria together with plants. And so my background's in engineering, and I've kind of had to span sort of an engineering and biology fields when I was looking to apply to the NSF, which was a little bit tricky. And I also mention this because since I'm leaving soon, we do need somebody to come take over my research. So if any of that looks interesting to you, come talk to me afterward. So this is kind of like a rough timeline I've just put up to try to help you figure out what you need to do before the application is due. Today, if you can, read the solicitation. It's long and boring, honestly, but they tell you exactly what they're looking for. And so just read very carefully. Probably by October, you're gonna wanna ask for your letters of recommendation because, advisors are really busy and they're not gonna write you a good one if you ask 2 weeks before. So do that, and then, yeah, we already kind of talked about the deadlines. But also, when you're writing your essays, UT does have resources for writing, and check out the Office of National Scholarships if you want help for that. Andrew Seidler is amazing and really fun to work with. He helped me apply for the Fulbright last year, so if you're interested in that and being a better writer. So yeah, step 1, read the solicitation. Step 2, look up NSF's mission statement. Just to see, what they're looking for. Here again, they tell you exactly what they want to see in your application. Jordan already kind of talked about some of those points. My biggest piece of advice is a super, it seems really trivial on the application. It just says, what is your field of research? But that actually determines who your audience or reviewers is. So I think that's super important. Because for me, since I'm spanning engineering and biology, I was really tempted to choose interdisciplinary as my field of research, but I think that's a huge mistake because if you do that, what actually happens is you pick the fields that are most relevant to your research. So I would have probably picked material science and biology. And then my application would have been sent to material scientists and biologists. And so you only have 2 pages to really describe your research. It's going to be really hard to convince material scientists to care about biology in 2 pages. So I think what you need to do instead is pick the field that is more related to the application of your research, and then just go all in for that because you need to know who your audience is before you even start writing to know how much detail to go into and et cetera. So I think that's a really important part of the application. So decide to which field and write for that audience. A big point too is that this fellowship is really funding you. NSF has tons of other grants that's looking at specific research projects, but here they're really focusing on wanting to fund graduate students for who you are as a person and your potential as a scientist. So really include what inspired you to do the research, how is it going to help you further in your career, and then tie both of your personal statement and your research statement together. So it's one cohesive application. But you do also need to have that solid research proposal down. So make sure that your project is feasible. I know it's really hard to write a whole 4-year project in 2 pages, but you do want to try to provide enough details, but not too much that, yeah, it's kind of a tight line to walk. So definitely also a good way to good reason to go talk to the Office of Scholarships to help you out for that. This is an excerpt from my proposal. I tried to make it really easy on reviewers by putting section headings. I mean, you don't have very much space, but if you can try to make it so they don't have to find, where's their hypothesis. Just blatantly write it out, make it easy on them. Play to your strengths, like I said, I did not have the best GPA, but I had, co-authored publications from undergrad, so I tried to really put that foot forward. So whatever your strength is, just try to highlight that. You do get critiques back from reviewers, and so some of mine were that my hypotheses could have been more specific. Details should be added to methods, and including more citations. So apparently I did not have 20. I understand it's really hard to put all of those details in just 2 pages, but try if you can, or just be really concise. Don't use extra words if you don't need them. And then they also suggested that I could be leading an extracurricular organization. So if you have that, it's probably really great. And that's all I have. So if you have any questions for me, let me know.
So you mentioned that in your actual outline for your research proposal that you didn't do a paragraph structure format. Do they prefer it to be more in a outline format?
I mean,
or does it just make it easier, I guess, for them to see?
Yeah, I think I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I'm sure each reviewer has their own preferences, but I felt that if I lead it out sort of bold and highlighted, that it would be easier for them to kind of go through and look at. I mean, it's still kind of each point is an actual complete sentence. It's not just an outline.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I tried to make it just easy on them because they read a lot of these and they're not going to want to have to find information.
Gotcha. And then you also indicate the references by numbers. Did you have full references, or did you also do short?
No, I did. Yeah, I did the same thing where I just put the smallest amount at the bottom in a footnote. You don't have a lot of space, so you have to make the best of it. Yeah.
Just to kind of point, I think it's a very good idea to really try to highlight things, but it's always a good idea to not overdo it. Don't highlight every second sentence or use italic and underline and 3 or 4 different ways of highlighting. It's always a balance, but definitely if you use I see allow me to R2 and R3, but it's very clear I can go to R2 and R3 just above there. I'm very clear what the person is using. So that's a very smart way of, if you don't want to repeat something, you have a definition for it, but then it's very clearly defined somewhere earlier. So. Yeah, it's a little bit of a balance, and again, maybe work with your advisor a little bit, right? Definitely get a little bit of feedback. So if somebody your advisor supports your application, they may give you some feedback in terms of, and they may have written some of the grant proposals to see. So the formatting thing is always a balance. You want to highlight things, but you don't want to overdo things. And I've seen applications, not GRFP, but and the NIH, that people just highlight every second sentence is highlighted or italicized and underlined, and you don't know, does it make a difference? So is underlined stronger than italic and bold, or how do you rank that? So it's someone was gosh, there's everything is important, but different importance levels. So be consistent in some ways, So yeah.
I have one more comment. Can everybody hear me?
No, it's for online. Yeah, sorry, because you unfortunately have to use the microphone.
So when you started your outline, did you originally start forming paragraphs to get all of your ideas together, or did you just continue to stay in that outline format?
It's really hard to remember. I applied in 2015. I got it in 2016, so it was a long time ago. But I think that I probably went outline style. I usually do introduction, the methods, hypotheses. I did have preliminary results, and I also included a figure of those preliminary results. I applied in my second year, so I'd already been in lab for about 5 months, and so that was helpful, I think. But yeah, I did kind of start filling in the outline, which is just generally how I write anyway, so that's kind of probably why I did it. But yeah, you could do it either way, probably.
All right, let's thank
Right. So I'm Sarah Cooper. I'm starting my 4th year as a genome science and technology student. And I work out at Oak Ridge in Jerry Parks' lab, where we do all sorts of stuff from antibiotic resistance to designing cancer vaccines to going from a protein sequence to structure. But none of those topics are actually what I wrote my proposal on. And so I think that kind of highlights the importance that when you apply to this, you don't necessarily have to do that specific work. So when I first came to graduate school my first year, the rules were different, and I could apply my first year and my second year. So I had some free time during a rotation where I said, oh, why not fill out an application? It's 2 pages and a 3-page personal statement. And at that point, I wrote it on labs that I hadn't rotated in, kind of talked to the advisors and tried to put something together, and ended up getting an honorable mention. So then second year came around, and I was like, oh, if I did fine last time, now that I'm actually in the lab and I know what I'm doing, I should have a little bit better of a chance. And so that kind of piggybacks off of what Jade said about how, you don't necessarily know if you're going to get it, but I don't think it hurts to try. For the amount of money that you get and 3 years of funding, it's probably a couple hours of your advisor's time to help you out and a bit more investment on your time, but far less than if you had to teach. So. Here are just the dates that we talked about before. I put the other ones in there in case, because I could, have applied to life sciences or chemistry or physics based on my work, and the dates are slightly different. And like we mentioned earlier, everything's due at 5 p.m. Eastern time on that date. And there's a link to the solicitation. I would recommend you read that several times. It's kind of long and boring, but like people previously said, it's going to tell you exactly what they want. And I would make sure you definitely meet the eligibility requirements. So when I came, I had a question because I had started doing a rotation early, and they said if you have more than X amount of graduate school time, then you're ineligible. But actually, because that was like a summer class type thing and not like a full-time thing, I was still eligible the second time. And then I would think quite a bit about what focus area you want, and kind of also about that interdisciplinary thing. So the way I structured my personal statement was that when I was in undergrad, I double majored and had a minor, so I've kind of developed an interdisciplinary curriculum for myself, but I didn't necessarily apply as an interdisciplinary project. So I think you can still say that you're bridging these areas without actually applying and having 2 different types of reviewers. And so the focus area I actually ended up applying to was chemistry, structure, dynamics, and mechanism, because at the time my main project was on antibiotic resistance, and you also have to think, this is NSF. They're not so interested in that type of project. That's more of an NIH type thing. And so we came up with something that's in the antibiotic realm, and using computer simulations, but is more focused on how these enzymes work rather than how the antibiotics themselves work. And I would say picking your recommendation letter, people, is important. So these are due a little bit later. I think it's November 1st this year. So your reviewers have a little bit more time, and that gives you time to send them your pretty much final proposal and read it before they submit your letter. And so yeah, you can get up letters from up to 5 people. I would recommend doing at least 4 in case something happens or somebody forgets. And if you have less than 2, they're not even going to review it. So just to be on the safe side, I would also recommend getting a diverse set of reference writers, not just people who know you for research. So I got people who knew me for some of the broader impacts and outreach type stuff I had done, because then they're going to lay the foundation in their letter for stuff that I had done, throughout my scientific career, and that's less that I have to try and squeeze in these couple pages. And definitely select people who know you. So sometimes there's do you pick the big name guy or do you pick the smaller guy who knows you better? I would say pick the smaller guy, because they're going to be able to, they've worked with you, they're going to be able to speak to your strengths maybe a little bit better, and instead of having just sort of a generic, the student's great type of application. So I picked my undergrad research advisor, well, one of them, one of my rotation advisors, and who was also my other fellowships PI, who had seen me do a bunch of outreach stuff, and then my current advisor, of course. And then one thing that I did, and maybe this will help people, I don't know, is I asked each person that wrote me a letter to kind of add a sentence or two about my intellectual merit and broader impacts using those kind of like keywords, because that's really like the two main things that NSF wants you to talk about. And so they're kind of supporting, everything that's actually in the proposal. And then the first thing I would say to do when you start writing is just like organize your thoughts, put everything down, in a Word doc or something, and then over time transform that into an outline. And then once you kind of have an idea, start discussing with your advisor. You're getting money so that you can do whatever work and that they don't have to pay for you, you don't have to teach. So it's kind of in their best interest as well to help you out. And I would definitely seek advice from people who have gone through it. Read other people's proposals, look online. There's a ton of resources for that type of stuff. And one thing that I did is I tried to tie the two statements together just very briefly because you don't have a lot of space, because then it makes them seem more like a cohesive unit, not you just talking about yourself and then you just talking about your work. And then I know Jordan talked a lot about personal statements, and I would agree with everything that she said. So, spend a little bit of time talking about your research, but don't just talk about your research, because there's more to you than just being a lab machine. And I would, definitely discuss any outreach you've done, and definitely talk about specifics. So, like Jordan said, if you want to work with these type of people or this school, say people's names. I said I wanted to work with this person who heads this thing at this school, and then it seems really specific, like I've done my homework, and I'm actually going to follow through with that, whether or not I get the application or not. And also, they want to know about your goals after graduate school. Maybe you don't know, but just say what you think at the time. And don't forget to talk about yourself and your own experiences. So I'll talk about this a bit on the next slide. And then your research statement, I would say start with finding a knowledge gap. What's something that's not known, and then try to fill it in, because you only have 2 pages. So you have to be really concise. Be very clear about your hypotheses and aims, and keep your references to a minimum, or at least condense the font down, or the format down. And still on like the personal statement type of things, your 2-page research statement, it's going to go by very fast. You're going to have all these methods, all these information references. So you really need to use this to tell your story. So if you, and personally, in my opinion, if you've made it to grad school, you're already pretty smart. You have the good grades to back you up. You've done research or whatever in the past, and so you need to say how you stick out of the crowd. How are you a good investment for NSF? And someone always told me that when you write proposals like this, to use your first sentence or two to really grab people's attention, because like if they're reading a huge stack of these, you want to kind of give them something fresh. So just as an example, my first sentence was a candle, an almond, and a cheese stick are the 3 things I think about when I first got interested in science. And that was sort of my theme throughout my personal statement that I tried to use to make myself maybe stand out. And like Jade said, they fund the person and not the project. And so you need to tell them why they should be funding you. And again, being specific, don't just list generic things like I'm going to mentor undergrads, because most people are going to do that while they're in graduate school, so it doesn't really help you stand out too much. And again, on the formatting, so don't use different types, but pick 1 or 2 and kind of go with it. Use white space. So I'd recommend taking a little bit of text out and putting in some white space just to break up blocks of text or sections or whatever. Keep the research jargon to a minimum. If these people aren't experts probably in your field, so if they don't know what you're talking about, they're not going to know how cool it is, and they're not going to say, oh yeah, I want to invest in that. And I would definitely highlight intellectual merit and broader impact, so if that's the only thing they read or really focus on, their attention is drawn right to that. And then one thing I like to do is, if I'm writing some sort of proposal, is to sort of push my thoughts into a figure. And that, like we said previously, is going to help you, replace a lot of words. So like we have this complicated mechanism. Trying to explain that in words would be, a boring nightmare. But if we can say this is what we want to simulate, and this is the active site of the protein we want to simulate, now it's a much more digestible way to figure out what the heck I'm supposed to be doing. And it'll help you with your narrative, help you work out kind of how you want to tell the story, and it shows that you really thought about the concept and how all these pieces are going to kind of fit together. And then, you're going to have to edit a lot. So by the end of this, you're probably going to be sick of reading these, few-page documents. And for me, I don't like talking about myself, so editing the personal statement was kind of a struggle. But definitely send it out to people, have them look at it. Even if you have one person who knows nothing about your research, but they really get you on your grammar, because if there's any grammatical problems or anything, they're probably going to pick up on that. And I recommend keeping versions. Maybe you wrote something that you liked a month ago that you kind of want to merge back in now, and try to be as clear and concise as possible, and just go through it several times and try to clean it up. And one thing that I would recommend is pay close attention to the format guidelines. So they have strict guidelines about the margins and stuff like that. And then what you do is you submit your document, and it'll convert it to a PDF in their system. And I know when I did it, I got hung up and took an extra day to do that. So definitely, try to submit at least a day early in case there's any problems. That way, you don't end up getting thrown out just because you don't have everything. And that's all I have. Any questions?
Just note on the submit early, so it's not the same as submitting and then it goes away, right? You can upload it to Fastlane, it can process it, you can see, make sure it works okay, then come back a week later and add a new version.
Yes.
Right, so you can do this many, many times, so do it early.
Claire?
Is this on? Yeah. So one aspect of writing the research proposal that is a little bit confusing to me is the balance between basically describing why your topic is so cool, so important, and the methods of how you're going to get at that. So I guess the reason that I ask why this seems maybe a little bit different than other grants to me is that, again, they're funding you, not the project. So if you give more of a background, perhaps you can kind of show your enthusiasm more. Mm-hmm. Anyway, can you speak to sort of that balance?
One thing I did is I talked a little bit about the importance of the work in my personal statement, because you're going to talk about your current work, right? Mm-hmm. So then you kind of say, hey, it's cool here, and then what you have to say in the research statement can be a little bit less, but maybe that's one of the places where you tie the two together. I don't know, maybe that's how I did it. Mm-hmm. And then, from there, you can spend a little bit more time on the methods. I really didn't spend too much time on the methods, so like the simulation method we did is called QMMMD. Like, you don't want to keep writing that many times because it's just, a nightmare alphabet soup. And so, we kept it really simple, kind of talked about it in, more generic terms, but so that it still seems like it's cool and innovative, and that we're using like state-of-the-art techniques. So, yeah, I think it's kind of hard to find the balance, and it depends on your project. Mm-hmm. But, I would recommend just like writing stuff down, and then you can always move things, or condense them or switch them between the documents. And you can also have your advisor talk about how cool the stuff you're doing is too, right? So say what he's doing, and then it's coming from him, and then, you say it, and then as you kind of go down, that's less and less you have to say in the actual research statement.
Okay, that makes sense. And can I ask one more question sort of on that? So then describing, I could make a really focused grant where I'm just describing exactly why my project, like with the methods and with the preliminary data that I have, is important. But I'm not a very linear thinker, or at least I tend to like think, but I'm already over here, this would be cool too. Do you want to give them sort of a sense when you're describing the background of your project, this is stuff that's going to continue on even beyond the proposed methods? Meaning that I could knock these methods out in the next year or two. Do I want to show them this is a big enough theme and kind of hint at that this project could continue past the methods? Or do you really want it to be sort of like the methods stitch up what you're proposing as, general background?
You have to think they're funding you for 3 years, right? So you need to come up with something that is tractable within a 3-year thing. So there's always more you can do after. So if it's something you can do in a year and that's all you put, I would maybe caution that, because if somebody knows those techniques and they say, oh, this isn't going to take 3 years, then that might be kind of a hole in your proposal. But I think a lot of it really just depends on who reviews it, kind of where you are in the stack, what kind of mood people are in the day. So, and everyone's proposal is going to be so different. So.
Okay, thanks.
So when you describe the methods, do you need to specifically say like what that method does, or is your audience going to have an understanding? Like if I say we're doing electrophysiological recordings, do I need to explain what that is, or do I need to like further elaborate that?
I think it depends. Maybe very briefly, just so they have some idea of what you're going to get out of it. So, like, for my simulations, you know, I said, we're going to do this, and we're going to simulate proton transfer from this to this to this. That's all I kind of said about the methods in that regard. Don't go in kind of too deep, because if people aren't familiar with it, then it's not going to mean anything, I think, to them.
I'm just going to give a comment. Assume that the reviewers know nothing about any of the details of any of the methods that you're using, because it is unlikely. Remember, these are people chosen broadly from lots of different areas of whatever sub-discipline you have checked off there. And the chance that they will know anything about the detailed methods that you are using is nil. Okay? It's possible, but it's not likely. So in broad strokes about why what you're doing is important and why the methods are feasible, and a reference to someone who has used those methods before is entirely appropriate.
I would just add to that exactly. So if the method is established, give a reference if there is space for the reference, and then you don't have to necessarily elaborate too much. I mean, as long as you say this is a commonly used method, etc., reference, and it's okay. Nobody would necessarily question that. Well, hopefully, you never know.
Well, and they're not going to have the time to like look at your references, but if you kind of put it there, it shows that you really thought about it. You've kind of done your homework, right? And made sure you're proposing the right methods.
Is it Anbubiko? Anbubiko? Udo is okay? With the last, okay. So we have the fresh, right? Recipient of the grant, Udo.
Thank you.
Slide advances, and this is a point.
Okay, I just need to advance. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Udo. I am beginning my third year, well, it's a semester started. I am in the Department of Biochemistry, cellular molecular biology. And I study how cells divide. So a lot of cell biology stuff, it's really hard to actually write, 2 pages. So this was a struggle for me. But I got it, so I must have done something right. Okay, so a bunch of my colleagues here have talked to you a lot about what to do, and so some stuff might just be repetitive, but I'll just highlight some of the things that I think were very crucial to me being awarded. The first thing is your research proposal, right? So you want to make sure that you put a figure. I think a figure is key, and I'll get to that. I talk about my reviewers and what they said just slightly, and I could tell that they didn't actually fully read the whole thing. They basically looked at my figure 1, and that was what they loved, and for some reason, they figured it out. So a figure would be nice if you can do it. Be concise, and be creative. So don't just, there's this box, a way that people think, and you think you're expected to think, but maybe just get a little creative with your methods or what you would like to do. And maybe if people have done something specific, or a lot of people are studying, for me, a lot of people are studying cytokinesis, so I have to say why my study of cytokinesis is unique. Personal statement. So again, we're talking about you being funded as a person and not just about your research. And so you have to show be original, tell your story, like what makes you unique, why you, and then be specific with your broader impacts and intellectual merits. Don't just throw out things. So if you're going to do something like, train undergraduate students, don't just say that. Like, make it more unique. Like, pick a group of undergraduate students that need help with something specific and what you're going to teach them. And read the guide. I read it and highlighted it again, and went over the broader impacts just to fully understand what they're really looking for. Okay. So you have to start on time. Okay, so I got done with my rotation somewhere in May. I thought I joined the lab, and then I left that lab and joined another lab. I started around July. And so I basically started writing my personal statement in August. August 1st, I wrote my personal statement. So if you haven't written it by now, I don't know, don't panic though. Just, try to get things started. Work with your PI if they are, willing to work with you. I think that they can give you a lot of advice, and they can tell when you're writing something that, might not be understood or feasible. Choose the right people to write your letter of recommendation. So for me, my PI wrote one. I had my peer mentor write one for me, and then I also had one of the PIs that I worked with as an internship after my undergrad write one for me. And while each time I wrote or made an edit, I was always asking myself, why should it be me? That was just a repetitive question. And then revisions, they're very important. I had 16 revisions for my research because I was very worried that people who would read it would not fully understand what I was saying. I needed to get a perspective from a lot of people. I asked my fellow students, I asked PIs from material science, I asked PIs in biochemistry specific, protein-specific research. I asked cell biologists, and I made sure that all of them understood before I sent out that my research statement. And then your personal statement as well, get that reviewed. But you might not want to overtouch that way too much because this is about you, so you still want that originality. Okay, so here's the fun part. So I had 3 reviewers. 2 of them said my proposal was excellent, and 1 of them said my proposal was very good. So the 2 people that said my proposal was excellent said this because they were able to follow my research proposal. That was the first thing. And these 2 people, I think, they didn't even read the research proposal, but I think they looked at the figure based on what they wrote. They also highlighted that my broader impacts and intellectual merits were very strong. And they said they fully understood what my research was about. Reviewer number 2 said, very good. They started out the sentence with, the student didn't have a very strong undergraduate background. Okay, so I have a 3.0. I've never published a paper. Matter of fact, when I was writing this, my PI was like, I need to tell you, a lot of people would say, if you've never published a paper, don't even try. Or, if you have my grade point average was 3.0. I mean, I still applied. I didn't, I was like, whether I get it or not, I'm just gonna take advantage of the experience. And so I encourage you to apply, so that's why he gave me very good, he or she said I didn't have a very strong undergraduate background, but I show, I'm looking for the word, so potential for future, they could tell that I have something to offer to the scientific community in the future. Okay, so I really think that they judge you based on, I kind of arranged this in the order which I think my reviewers were thinking. Number 1, they understood my research and understood that it made sense, it's feasible, it can work within 3 years or more and has more open-ended questions. They also looked at the intellectual merit of my work, my broader impact, and then they also analyzed who I was. So this is my final slide. I just want to end, since we've been learning a lot and being very serious, with kind of a funny note. So that is Dr. Seuss over there. And Dr. Seuss says something about, that people who, it's not really him that said this, but he's famous for it for some reason. And he says people that mind don't matter, and people that don't matter mind. And so I think the reviewers matter and they mind. So it is fully your responsibility to make sure that they understand. Whether this takes 12, 15 revisions, if you really want to get it, you have to make the effort. Whether it takes, however many edits you need, whatever you need to write, whatever you need to get yourself to do. Yeah. And I will answer questions.
So you mentioned you didn't come in with a stellar GPA or a lot of you didn't have publications or anything like that. Did you just have a lot of research experience or outreach activity? What was it that made you unique?
Yeah. So I graduated from the University of Montana, and then I moved to Washington on an OPT. At this time, I was actually still an international student. And when I moved to Seattle, I was looking specifically for a job in the biotechnology market, and that's where a lot of them are. Well, I didn't get that. I'm just coming out from school, and so I had to go back to school. So I started at UW, which is the University of Washington, and I started taking classes. I took classes for 2 semesters, and I worked in a research lab. And then after that, I also got an internship at the Allen Institute for Brain Science, where I worked for 6 months. And I kind of talk about that also in my personal essay. I talk a lot about my struggles and some of the things I went through. And then from there, I decided, to go to graduate school. So I wasn't really thinking, I didn't quite know when I came out from undergrad. I knew I wanted to continue studying, but it didn't quite hit me that I needed to go to grad school. And so I needed that transition phase to figure this out, and then coming down here for grad school, doing my rotations, joining a lab, getting out of that lab, joining another lab, and I talk about that. So, I think, yes. So what makes you unique? So I didn't have a paper. I didn't have a 3.7 or 4.0 GPA, but I kind of thought about, why should I stand out? So why me again? And if you can come up with a very good answer that's reasonable as to why you, something that any human being could, appreciate, I think you should write it. Yeah.
Maybe you covered this when I stepped out. What was your outreach? If you just want to speak about maybe what your outreach was and sort of how you came up with how to do that.
Okay.
I have some ideas, but I have no idea if they're feasible.
Okay, so my broader impact. So being in peer, I talked about some of the things that I had done. One of them was, there's this group called the Men of Tomorrow. I don't know if you guys have had the opportunity to do that. No? Okay. So in peer, we get to, for some reason, peer, okay, everybody knows what peer is? Yes? Okay. So peer is a program for equity and equality in research or something like that. And it gives money to scholars. It's funded by the NIH, people who show strong potential in the first year of in the beginning of your graduate studies, and they fund you for the first 2 years. So you don't have to teach. You just, go to class and come back and go to lab. And peer is able to go out and seek out little things that are happening in the community where students get to go out and engage in some kind of, outreach. And so one of them that I participated in was the Men of Tomorrow, where I, helped to, design experiments for these kids in middle school. And all these kids, a lot of them are young black men. So, I didn't highlight that as the goal. I kind of just talked about going out there to talk to people about science. When I first got here, actually, I didn't know anybody, so I joined the multicultural graduate student organization, and I kind of like engaged in it. I have not been with them ever since I got my GRFP, which is not good. But I think once I get done with my prelim, I will get back into those things. But yeah, I talked about that. I also talked about things I had done in the past, and I kind of end my essay like this, my personal statement, where after you talk about yourself, you do your broader impacts, you do your intellectual merits. And I basically said I think that what I've done in the past and what I'm doing now, and my outline for what I'm going to do in the next few years has highlighted the qualities in me that make me, so you don't want to sound too good, like, look at me, I'm awesome. But you want to be able to highlight that, look, because of the things that I have, shown that I can do, I hope that I have convinced you that I'm able to, yeah.
Okay, so you didn't propose any future outreach. You just said, I'll continue with what
Yes.
the stuff I've already been doing.
Basically, I said
Okay.
I'll continue what I've been doing. I talked about also going to conferences, and I didn't just say I'll present my research in a conference. No, I was very specific about some of the conferences that we attend as a lab and the times that they happen during the year and when I will be attending. Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Hi. Just a quick question. So I understand from what you said that putting a figure in your proposal is important.
I think it is.
Okay. So if you cannot really put your research in a figure, what would be the other alternative that you could use? Because it's not always molecular and you can actually show figures.
Okay. It's very difficult for me to think about this because for me, I will always imagine something, even if it's drawing sticks or circles or to mimic a brain or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And then you can just highlight in a key what you can even make a cartoon. But if there is a case where you can't, I think I would do what Jade? Yeah, you can kind of like, I don't know, highlight, make a box, and you could maybe make more like succinct statements, like one highlight, maybe experiment, hypotheses, or you can say A, B, C, and draw arrows. There has to be a way. You can still use words and boxes, and just make it easy to follow, I think. Would be
Okay, another quick question. So how detailed does your methods need to be?
Okay, that's a good question. So like we had talked about in the previous when Sarah talked, they need to know what you're doing, and you need to be keep it as simple as possible. But if you have something that's very, very complicated, you can just briefly talk about why you want to use it, and then say as used here. So, for example, I was saying I would like to count specific molecules at the division site, and I'm going to align my cells in a perpendicular manner using a microfluidic device, but then I also said as used here. So if they really want to know more about this, they get the point. I want to see how molecules are arranged at the ring. And they get the point. There's a place where it's been done before. If they really care about all the nitty-gritty details, they can always go in there and look for it.
All right, thank you.
I just want to make a comment on the figure thing. Some things that I've seen people use is like concept maps. So instead of like using like a direct molecular structure, like starting with your question and kind of like your sub questions and like that kind of stuff. So if that is useful, do it. But the big thing with the GRFP is everyone is different. So if it just doesn't work for you, don't try and force it in. Don't try and force anything. Just do whatever works for you. If it helps you save space or if it helps you make things clearer, do it. And if it doesn't, throw it out.
I just wanted to highlight about how much the methods. I think the good test is give it to give your written stuff to somebody else who is not an expert in your area. They will tell you if they don't understand anything or they understand something. So it's very hard, I think, by yourself to determine really how much you need to write. I mean, you will write as much as you think you need. You need somebody else with a completely different set of eyes, and they will, critical enough in a way that will say, I have no idea what you're talking about, or yes, I think I got it. So that would be a test. I think self-determination will always be hard because you know it so well. You feel like, yep, it's all clear, and then you need somebody else. Like if you are microbiology, somebody from ecology, or from engineering, or somewhere that they don't really know. That would be my advice too. So have somebody else to trim you down or expand if you need to. So other questions? All right, let's go again. So the idea is that essentially we will invite everybody to sit here, and maybe if there are more questions to anybody, if somebody came up with more ideas. And then we also have Lou Gross, who has been serving some time ago, right, Lou? Long time ago, as he said.
Up a few things on this.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. And so there is more opportunity to ask questions. Think about it. We still have some time, and you can ask anybody, or you can ask all the panelists for, personal details or some other things, etc. Do you guys want to go sit down there?
I'm just going
Oh, sorry. Maybe first, Lou.
Why don't
Sorry.
you give me just a minute, just to point out a couple of things, okay?
Microphone. Sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. First of all, I really appreciate all the presentations that you did because you were great, okay? And I want to preface this by the fact that this is a lot of money, all right? In fact, the amount of money that you all have successfully gotten is more than virtually any beginning assistant professor gets, okay, in the first 3 years that they are a faculty member. So you should be really proud of the fact that you were successful at this. But I also want to point out that there are a fair number of these, and that your chances of getting them are not slim. Even if they've knocked it to 1,500 this year, in which, by the way, you don't really know how much they're going to give out. It's approximate. You still have, given that there's probably 10 to 15,000 applicants or so, that's a better than 1 in 10 chance. And most NSF programs are funding at the 5 to 10% level now. So you have a decent shot at this. What I don't have is the data from UT that tells us, we've got 4 right here, how many others there's been and how many applications there were. We don't know. So my bottom line is, it's a lot of money. You should invest the time to try to do this, even though you think that, no, I'm not going to be successful. Don't doubt yourself, okay? You can do it. And as you can tell from a couple of the folks, your record, yeah, it matters, but it may not matter nearly as much as getting across to the reviewers that you are someone that is worth investing in, okay? And I wanted to point out a few things. So one is that there is the Fastlane website, and that's where you can go and read all the details of the RFP. But there's also other things, okay? So let's see. Not that one. Not that one. Oh, come on. Sorry. There's this thing. And I don't know if you've been to this. This is grfp.org. This is not run by NSF. It's run by a contract organization, in this case, one of the engineering associations. And their job is to help you write proposals, okay? Not just you, but you can see there's information for applicants, for the reference writers. So what you might do when you ask your references to write letters, send them to a link to this. There's a FAQ under this to help them write letters, okay? Make it as easy on your reference writers as possible, okay? So if you go down there, there's requirements, there's tips for your reference writers, and there's a FAQ, all right? Anything you can do to help your reference writers is a good thing. There's also information on the panelists, and I need to tell you that the way that this worked has changed a lot, and that affects, in some sense, how you write this. So the way that this used to work is that there were actual panels, that you went physically to Washington, you had a room in which a bunch of you were in the room, and you were reviewing all these, and frankly, you could argue back and forth about, yes, I think this one should be higher rated, et cetera, and this one needs funding. And you, by the way, the panelists and your reviewers do not decide who gets funding. The program officers decide who gets funding, okay? So you pointed out you had 2 excellents and 1 very good. It can be in some program officers would have thrown that out. Other ones would not. And nowadays, it is not done like that at all. Everything is done virtually. So this makes it even more important that you connect to that reviewer who's going to stand up for what you've done and be able to make a pitch in a very brief time online, which is hard to do because of the way these panels are set up as to why it should be really chosen. And so I'm not sure that NSF has really thought through carefully the most effective ways to guarantee that the online panels work in the same way that the sort of the old style ones have worked. When I've talked to the program officers, some of them hate the virtual panels, some of them like them, some of them, it's to save money, frankly, okay? That's why they're doing it that way. I think pretty much they all think that it would be better if everyone was in the room. From your perspective, though, it means that you're telling your story in an effective way is even more important than it was before, okay? And then there's a couple of other things. So there's this site I found that maybe echoes some of the things that you all said. So this is a talk similar to the ones that you gave, and I thought it was really nice to have it sort of summarized here, and maybe you saw this already. So I'll just quickly go through this. Read all the materials, you already said that. Use your 2 required statements to tell a story. Telling a story is really important about you. They're investing in you. They're not investing in the research project, except kind of peripherally. Put the person in the personal statement, what's unique about you, and anything you can say about how you got to where you are is really important here. Be strategic about what you highlight here. In this case, you don't want to generally repeat in any major way what you put in the research statement and what you put in the personal statement. But I encourage you to think of a catchphrase or something like that that you repeat in both places, okay, to make that connection. And it may be a catchphrase associated with what you do. So if I were going to do it, it would be, based on my research, spatial control, what to do, where to do it, when to do it, and how to assess whether or not you're successful. So that's a catchphrase that I would put in saying this is the area of research that I'm working in, and I'm going to repeat it in both places. I like the idea of figures and boxes, okay? There's no reason why you can't have to have a side box with text going around it that allows you to sort of highlight the hypotheses if there are hypotheses and methods in there. And then that sort of goes along with bold, underlined, and italicized. Sell it. Make sure that indeed, I would never use the term stud muffin, but Jordan can do it. Okay. You want to make it clear that you have a unique set of skills that will allow you to be successful. Okay. Time, yeah, give yourself, well. People write in different ways, so obviously there's not a lot of time if you're going to do this year, but you still have significant amounts of time to do it. And I also, I'm going to echo something that was said, I think, by several of you, that having different people read this is a good idea, and have someone who read it who is not at all technically inclined. I have had any number of times in which I've given my wife, who's a poet, something to read, and she will come back and ask me questions that I would not have thought of. And because you don't know who these reviewers are or what their skills are, having someone read that who is not a science or at all might be beneficial. Okay, I don't know how you all feel about that, but yeah. And that's all I wanted to say to kick this off. So we'll go to panel one. Yeah. Okay.
Panel. Thank you. So I think, yeah, so Eric needs to probably change the camera. But now there's an opportunity for everybody to kind of, ask more questions if you have more questions. And then we have tons of pizza left. If anybody wants some more. So you can ask any specific person, anybody, if you have questions about reviewing process. Anybody? All clear?
And nobody's online to tweet to us, right?
Is that nobody?
No one's tweeted. I don't know if people online, but no one's tweeted that.
Okay. All right.
Thanks. Okay. So I've been sort of, I guess, asking around to get just examples of other people's things. How many did you guys look at? I don't know. Do you find that there's like a lot of diversity in ways that it can be done? I haven't really looked at too many of these. How many did you only solicit ones from people in your field? Like, I don't know. Is it a bad idea to look at somebody who got it in math, or if I'm an ecologist?
I had looked at several successful sort of applications. One of my good friends has her own website that she tries to assemble all of these, and she really focuses on NSF GRFP. Her name is Mallory Ladd, MalloryLadd.com. I can write on the board or something. But she has probably if you Googled it, her website's come up. But she has a bunch of examples on there and stuff, and I found that really helpful. And then I had her help me review mine because she had already gotten hers, and so that was helpful for me.
And I think if you think about how everyone's going to be so different, reading someone in math versus reading someone in your field, you still might see the same type of differences. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to do that. But I wouldn't read too many, because then you kind of want to go in all these directions, and it's kind of hard to find one that works for you. But there's definitely plenty online, and I know of a couple other websites I've seen just Googling that kind of curate a list of them, and so you can just kind of see.
So I read quite a few, and one thing in our department, we actually have a repository of everybody that's ever won them in our department, so you can email Grebe and they'll give them to you. If anybody in any other departments wants to have access to that too, you can email me or anybody in EEB. But one thing that like they said, the thing that reading a lot of them kind of tells you is just exactly how different everybody's is. Everybody's personal statement looks like they're different planets, and that's not a bad thing, because again, it's about kind of how you stand out. So it makes sense that the ones that win are the ones that look different than everybody else's, right? So kind of what I tried to do is kind of look at what seemed to work for different people and kind of take that, I have a friend that works in spiders, Angela, who her whole personal statement was about a spider research project and how that really inspired her, and then she now works on spiders, so her whole research statement was on spiders. So that was kind of something that the connection between the two is something that I tried to incorporate into mine, even though mine didn't look anything like that. My whole first part of my research or my personal statement was on a Thanksgiving dinner with my family. So they all look very different, but you can kind of find things that you like and things that seem to work, figures that work for them, or ways of formatting that work for them, or different types of references, formats that work for them.
Yeah, I agree with everybody. And I think that I read Sarah's and I read Julie's, and those were the only two I read. They kind of gave me perspective, especially for the research side. One, because they're very different. And so, I kind of like to, when I read both of theirs, I figured out that there is a way that you could relay your information, if it's complicated, in such a way that everybody could understand. And so that was very helpful for me, and that's why I would recommend reading. But for your personal statement, again, just keep it as original as possible, and don't over-review it, but check for grammatical issues.
There's one thing that I did not emphasize in my brief comments. And so this is from a paper by a set of NSF program officers. It was published in 2015 about broader impacts in NSF proposals. And I'll bring up the heading here. It's actually in the, I sent it to Brian, so it's in the pool. And the reason I brought this up is that a couple things I've noticed in reviewing for broader impacts, not just in GRFPs, but on others, is that people feel sometimes that they have to check the boxes, okay? You don't have to check the box for a whole set of topics. This breaks down the kinds of things that broader impacts are, okay? You don't have to check all of them. What I think a reviewer will find most important for this is something that connects to your personal efforts in the past, whether that was helping out a couple of school kids, either individually or in a class, or whether that was, going to a science fair and helping out Judge, or whatever it was that you were doing, or whether it was tutoring. You don't need to check every box, but you do need to have something in there that clearly goes beyond the research and connects to you as a person. And choosing one of these, and we could go through. You all mentioned what you did as potentially, and you don't have to do it. Oh, sorry. You never have to do what you've put in an NSF award. It is a research proposal, okay? And everyone knows that research is risky and that you are not guaranteeing that you are going to do X, Y, and Z. Okay? The same thing applies to broader impacts. You are not guaranteeing that you are doing this or that. But a reviewer will see if you put down, I'm going to do this and this and this and this. Okay, I'm going to run this workshop for this group of students. I'm going to do this. They're going to say, wait a minute, that's not realistic. Okay? And that will knock you down. So make sure it's something that you are interested in, have some experience in, or are willing to learn about, and make it feasible. Okay. Yeah.
I think off of that, so the first time I applied when I didn't really know what I was doing and didn't have a whole lot of advice, is I think I was too ambitious. I put too many things in my laundry list of broader impacts. And then second time, I really tried to pick ones that were specific to me. So like, being a woman in computational science, so working, with those types of people. Or I said I would do some outreach with trying to promote LGBT people in STEM, so that it's something that's kind of like near and dear to me, and then that means that I'm maybe more likely to do it than just saying, hey, I'm checking this box, checking this box, checking this box because I think I have to.
And it would be easy to misinterpret what Lou said as like, well, you don't have to do it once you get it. You should clearly do it, but like if you're helping Darwin Day, Tennessee, and then I'm stuck at like Harvard for grad school, you can't do Darwin Day, Tennessee, you have to do something else. But deliver on something and also help you long term, and yeah. So don't misinterpret Lou. Yeah.
Yeah, they do make you report every year what you've done. So they can revoke it if you don't do anything. But
No, the point was that if an experiment that you put in there does not work, it doesn't mean you have to give the money back, okay? It means that you do need to think carefully about how to modify what you've initially said you were going to do in order to do something that's along the same lines. And the same thing is true for outreach, okay? You don't have to necessarily go every week to this, middle school, after school session. Although I have a colleague who is Suzanne Lenhart, who is the Associate Director here for Education and Outreach and a Chancellor's Professor and a very, very distinguished scholar. And every week for the last 18 years, she has gone on a Wednesday afternoon to Bearden High School to help in their math club, right? So, I mean, you can point to examples like that and say, you know, I'm not at that career stage yet, but I would like to start this by doing X, okay? That kind of a thing.
One thing kind of along those lines with the research statement, you're not you don't have to do that project for your dissertation. So you don't have to feel like you're like writing out a 2-page explanation of your specific dissertation. You are not tied to that at all. Like the project that I wrote on is actually one that I didn't end up doing because somebody the next year defended a dissertation that was that exact project, which sucked. But but so don't feel like you're tied to that project. Again, they're evaluating you as a person and as a scholar, not your project. So the idea of the project is to look at how you think about science, is to how well you're able to come up with a project that would be feasible, that does make sense, and that does add to the field. But you're not tied to that project in any way, shape, or form.
You are, however, tied sort of to the section that you submit in. So, like, if I submitted to chemistry, you know, some of my projects have to be sort of chemistry related. So if you work in a lab like mine that's very diverse, then, you know, I can't just go off and do a whole bunch of something that's, like, totally left field of what I applied. But I think after the first year, if you have a really big change, like maybe you submitted it as a rotation, then you joined a different lab, and it's quite a big change, you know, then that's maybe more of an understandable thing. And I think you can even switch your field of study after like a year or so. So it's not that you can't change it, but you can't just like totally do a 180 and do something different.
And also for undergrads, I mean, you don't even have a grad school yet, right? So you're applying to work with a mentor. You may not go work with her. You may go somewhere else, right? And that's okay, right? So don't feel even though you partner with this person, you can choose to go somewhere else for grad school and take your money with you because it's your money. What?
I think probably what you cannot do is like take your first year salary and go to Hawaii for a year and just be on the beach, etc. So that you cannot do. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do, but there's a few things you cannot. So probably that you cannot do. You can switch the field maybe, or
go to U.S. grad school, I think, and there's limits like that, right? But
okay, now I'm going to push back just a little bit on what Vitaly said, because as a theorist, I've been envious of many of my biology friends who choose a field organism and a project based upon going to, not necessarily Hawaii, but going to great field sites. So you could twist that a little bit.
I just had maybe a question to our awardees. Maybe this is a point of contact for you as well. So for you who are thinking about applying, shoot them an email and maybe ask them, can you take a look at my proposal? So if they have the time, and I mean, I'm sure they're very busy, but they may find the time to read your 3 pages and give you maybe a little bit of feedback. So they've seen some and they can compare, and presumably they will be out of your field of study, which would be good for you to get a different perspective. So that's a good point of contact. So it seems like they're nodding, so I assume that they're happy to do that maybe. So you utilize them as a resource.
And also, I mean, there's also the EB Mentor Match. So if you look on Twitter, also we made a set of notes for all this. You'll get access to the notes, and there's a link there to EB Mentor Match, so you can have mentors outside your institution help you. If your intended advisor will not help you, someone mentioned this, they're not a good advisor. So it's a good indicator. Like if they're not going to help you get this great award that gives you lots of freedom to do excellent research or learning, teaching, or whatever you care about, they're not a good fit for you. Flee. Because it's going to be bad in general. So it's a good test.
So this is just in concern for BCMB students who wanted to be here, but they couldn't because they have 511, and then they have this computational class. And unfortunately, because of the timing of everything, we weren't able to. I was going to send you an email, and I figured it was Thursday. There's just no point. But would this be available? I mean, we're streaming live, but after this, will it still be available? Okay, awesome.
We'll have it available for others. And sorry about that.
That's fine.
But actually, are we going to put a link for the recording on the Nimbus page?
I think so. That's Catherine, I think.
Yeah, we'll put a link to the recording and put a link to the notes. We're going to have the captioning of the recording, so it should be accessible for
You
everyone.
should be able to find it on the Nimbus page for this.
Yeah. Sorry about the conflict of timing. Oh, some people skip that class. So just yeah, it's like an NSF, application. You don't have to do everything in that proposal. You don't have to come to
Right. I would like to thank Vitaly and Brian, okay, who organized this.
Yeah.
And so let's thank them.
But all of you, thank you for volunteering again and again. You're such a wonderful group of people, as well as I'm always amazed by the fact that it seems like we're going to talk about the same thing, but as the applications for the fellowship, your presentations are so complementary. So it's really great. Thank you very much for participating.